Hi all, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now this is a very quick video just showing the differences between different watercolour paper. They're all from Daler Rowney, and I have an Aquafine hot press, an Aquafine cold pressed and a Langton Prestige 100% cotton paper to try. The reason behind this video is because I just couldn't really find anything on YouTube when I was wanting to see the difference between the different paper and what is best to use for what technique. So I decided to do my own. This is my first time doing it, so I hope you find it helpful. But if there's any tips or anything in future that you would have liked to have seen, do let me know in the comments below. Okay, so starting off, I did some swatching. Now, I did use the same 4 colours for all of the swatches to keep consistency. And as much as I am using gouache, I did use some watercolour techniques in terms of doing a wet on wet technique at first and then a wet on dry. Now, the wet on wet technique does work a lot better with actual watercolours than it does with gouache, but I am primarily a gouache painter at the moment. I really love the medium. And this is what I was wanting the paper for, is to test out what paper is going to be used for some of the final pieces and like finished ideas that I really want to get painting. This was going to be the best way for me to test it out, and I thought, why not make a video if anyone's interested in that as well. So I am using gouache. It's my Reeves gouache, just my basic student grade gouache. And the wet on wet technique, I started off with hot press paper first, and one thing you notice straight away with hot press paper is it's very smooth to the touch, and this kind of reminded me more of a sketchbook paper. It was a lot thicker, it's 300 GSM, but I did find it, yeah, very smooth, similar to my sketchbook, so I kind of figured this would be the one I'd be most used to. Similar to what I found before with any smooth paper, the water does pool on top of the paper, and that meant that when I was adding the colour to it and doing a wash of colour, that the colours would mix together very easily, because it took so long for the paint to dry, because the water just sits on top of the paper, that the colours would then mix together. Now, I don't mind this personally. It can work for different styles depending on what you're looking for. The wet on dry technique was pretty much as expected, just swatches of colour. I did find that with the hot press compared to the other 2 papers, that the colours did dry a little bit muted. Now, that could just be the water to colour ratio that I was using, because obviously it's not controlled specifically. Although I did try to use the same amount, it's difficult to monitor that. So it could just be that, but that's just what I noticed. I then moved on to the cold press paper, which when you touch it is a lot more textured than the hot press, which is nice. It's got a nice feel to it, and when you're doing the wet on wet technique, the paper absorbs some of that water, so the colours don't really mix or run into each other unless you use a significant amount of water. But I found it just did that nice little watercolour effect where it just kind of spreads out into the water, not as much as it would with a watercolour, but enough that you could see that the gouache spreading with the water that I'd put onto the page. And then, as usual, the wet on dry technique, although I did notice that with the wet on dry technique, my paintbrush was catching on some of the tooth of the paper, which I didn't really expect, although I should have expected that because it is more textured, but that was just something to be aware of. The final paper that I did was cotton. It actually reacted very, very similar to the cold press. It's just that bit more textured than the cold press paper, so you'll notice it's a lot more textured. The paper feels a lot more weighty than the cold press paper, but in terms of actually swatching, it was a very similar experience. So after I finished with the swatches, I moved on to doing a floral piece. Literally, I just did something very, very simple. I wasn't doing it to try and do something really fancy or anything like that. This was just to compare how actually painting an image would feel between the papers. And I kept the image the same for each one, and I used the same 4 colours that I'd done for the swatching, just to keep consistency. So I did find with the hot press that because the water pools on top of the page, it was very difficult to do any smaller details. So because I was doing such a small image, the colours were running together. However, when it dried, it had that really nice effect that I quite like from watercolours, where you've got like these transparent layers and you can still see like the background colour through the page, from the page. Now, hot press is going to be amazing for anyone looking for that more transparent effect, and if you're wanting to do any details with any fine liners or anything like that, because the paper is smooth enough that it's not going to mess up your pens at all. The cold press was slightly different because it absorbed the water a bit quicker. You could do more finer details with paint. I wouldn't advise using any fine liners on this paper because it will wear down the nib of the pen, but for painting it's actually a really good medium because the layers dry quicker than the hot press because it's being absorbed more. The only thing is try not to let your brush be too dry because it will catch unless that's a certain technique that you're looking for, but I personally don't like the feel of a paintbrush catching on the tooth of the paper. The cotton was the one I was most looking forward to, but actually it was similar to the cold press, but I actually found it harder to paint on, and it also made the colours seem a lot darker, which again, I'm not sure if that's the water to gouache ratio or not, or whether it's just a factor because of how that worked. I'm not 100% sure. I am going to be doing some more tests of this paper just to compare that a bit more. But yeah, I'm actually surprised. Again, with the cotton paper, I wouldn't use any fine liners or things like that because it will wear down the nibs of your pens. Overall, my two favourite are definitely the cold press and hot press. Hot press for more looser layers of colour, and cold press for those finer painted details that I want to do. Anyway, this video is pretty much over. If there's anything I didn't cover, please do let me know in the comments below. I'm happy to go over it, and I'll try and maybe do a more in-depth video at a further date. But as this is my first time doing it, I thought let's just give it a try. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. And please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this sort of video. It really does help the channel out.